Hi, it's Rhonda Kuning here again, and I'm adding another folder to my folder book, sticking it together with some paper tape, and these are the pages that I'm using. You'll find that printout on my website, which is hopeinheart.net, and you can download that for nothing. And just adding some sheet music and a serviette that I'm ripping up and placing all over the place for a bit of textural interest in the background. Gluing that down with some Mod Podge. It glues down most things, so I just use it to glue everything down. It makes a great base. I should have got the matte. I wanted to get the matte, but I picked up the gloss for some reason. And now I'm using the sheet music as a lock because there's a key in my design, so I decided to make a lock out of the sheet music. By folding it in half and cutting it out that way, it's even on both sides, and it also gives you a reference line for the center so that you can place it nicely in the middle. And this is part of the printout. It's got a line down the middle of that keyhole so that it's easy to make sure it's in the center, and another Bible verse to go on the page that you don't even see at the end because it's covered up in so much paint, but I know it's there. And because there's only one piece of sheet music on the page, it sort of looks a bit out of place, so I ripped up a few extra pieces of sheet music and glued them down around the page. Now, to unify the whole thing, I'm adding a whole heap of yellows. The list is on the description for the video. I'm not going to describe them all because I can't pronounce some of them. The unbleached titanium is the lightest colour, and the yellow oxide is the darkest yellow. And I use the yellow oxide to go around the lock, just so that it doesn't disappear completely. But then after it's dry, it looks really, really bright, so I decided to tone it all down with some acrylic medium and the unbleached titanium mixed together, and a little bit of water sprayed on there as well, and just to give it a wash to tone it all down. I could have used gesso as well, but I wanted it not quite so white. Now, these colours are burnt umber, raw sienna, and the yellow oxide, and I'm mixing the acrylic medium with those as well to make a glaze, and roughly outlining the page and the lock with the burnt umber, and splodging all the colours around in the meantime, all around the page. And then spray the whole lot with water because I want them all to merge in together. And I'm now spraying it with some alcohol, but because it's not moving enough, I pick up the whole lot, and now it's moving. But now it's also really, really wet, so to get rid of some of that water, I dab it with a dry wet wipe, and to put back some of that burnt umber that I took off, I'm going around the page as well. Now, the alcohol has a wonderful effect on the wet paint in that it makes little circles that spray out, but because there's so much water it works, but then the water floods back in as the alcohol dries. So I'm trying to dry the paint before the paint can come back into those wonderful little circles that the alcohol makes. And it gives a lovely mottled effect to the page, as you can see. Now, re-outlining that lock in the burnt umber, and the keyhole, because even though I want to go over this in black, by putting a dark colour under it, it gives it more depth. Now, getting rid of all those excess bits and pieces, the excess paint and the bits of serviette and sheet music that are hanging over the edge, just so I can see where the edge of my page is. and also to clean it up. I got a little bit of paint on my previous painting, but because I'd sprayed it with gloss enamel and then with silicone spray, it was fairly easy to wipe off with a wet wipe. Now I'm adding a bit more textural interest with some cogs that I have die cut out of this piece of cardboard, and I'm using the cardboard as a stencil with watercolour pencils. Even though they don't work particularly well on top of acrylic paint, you have to press fairly hard, but because it's a fairly textured surface, it also rubs off quite a bit of the pigment onto the page. I'm using browns, brown, black, the light blue and the purple watercolour pencils. Yeah, the blue really stands out against that brown. And while I am about to wet it, so I decide I'll colour all these pieces, and these are all cut out from the printout. I didn't show you me cutting it out because I'm sure you know how to cut things out of paper. And these are distress inks. The first colour I'm using is the antique linen, and then I use the crushed corduroy. The purple is a lovely purple, I love the purple. It's dusty concord, and then the turquoisey colour is broken china. And I don't have the sprays. If you had the sprays it would probably be easier, but I don't have them, so I just use the droppers and a bottle of water sprayed on there to spread them around. And now they're dry and ready to go. I'm just placing them on the page so I can see what it looks like before I glue them down. Now because I want to glue them down with Mod Podge, I need to activate the watercolour pencils, otherwise when I put the Mod Podge on it will activate and it'll go everywhere. So I've just sprayed a little bit of water onto my palette and I'm using that to activate the watercolour pencil and going around the whole lot. It's a bit fiddly, but it's fun. And then I move everything around to where I want it and glue it all down with the Mod Podge. It's not hard to do. The hard part is getting it all to line up properly. Me and straight lines don't always go together. And finally the key. I wanted the key just to touch where the keyhole was. Now some black for the keyhole to make it nice and dark. And since I've got the black out, I'm outlining the lock and some of the other elements. You could use a pit pen for this, it would be easier. And I decided maybe it would be easier to use the watercolour pencil since I had them sitting next to me. But they weren't really the easy option because, as I said before, they don't like drawing over the top of acrylic paint. So they were a bit more difficult to work with than I would have liked. But they do add a little bit of colour here and there and a little bit of a shadow, but not anything noticeable. Not in the video anyway. In real life you can see where they are. So then I get out the copper paint because I want to add a little bit of shine to the page. And I also use this to accent where the cogs are. It makes them stand out because they really disappear into the page because the watercolour pencils aren't that dark. And outlining the shadows with the black paint and a paintbrush, purely because I had it with me. If I had to use the pit pen I wouldn't have needed to do this bit. But the black paint was there, so I used it. I always think it's better to use what you've got in hand than try and fish around for something else. Now I just signed that and added a little bit of black on the corners. I already had that brown frame in, I just wanted to make the corners that little bit darker. And I decided that the elements didn't stand out very much, so I used some glossy accents over the top of that. I haven't got the glossy accents on very thick because I know that when you put it in a book it tends to glue the pages together even though it is dry where I live anyway. I live in quite a humid location, so things don't tend to dry terribly fast. And that is the finished project. You can just see the gloss on that, on the key and the words, but not a great deal. But it does bring out the colour a little bit more. And the copper paint is quite iridescent. You'll see as the light hits it, it stands out quite nicely. And that's it for this week. I'll talk to you again next week. I hope you go to my page and download it. And this is me just pulling apart the page so that I can do the next one. And because I have to cut down the middle of that lock, I need to add a little bit of black in there to cover up the white edges. And that is the finished look. Talk to you next time. Have fun. Bye.